Hi everyone, welcome to Tuesday's Tips with Laurie. Today I thought it would be really helpful maybe to talk about hooping and different methods of hooping and getting your project in the hoop straight or centered. So to start with, I was going to start with this tote bag. When you're using a tote bag, generally depending on what you're stitching out, I like to use wash away stabilizer or tear away stabilizer. And the first thing I do is I take my bag and I open it up in half, and then you're going to iron, matching these handles at the top, because the bags aren't always exactly square, so you want to match the handles. And then you're going to iron your bottom crease, and then I'm going to open it up, and that way I know where halfway is. The next thing I do is I fold it in half lengthwise. Be sure to, I'm going to use this top half, so be sure to line up your handles once again. And then, obviously I don't have an ironing board, I'm pretending to iron. So, anyway, iron just the top half where you're going to be working, and then you just simply fold that down in half, and you iron one more time. And then this creates your top grid. You can see that it creates a perfect square, and you know right where the center of that bag is. And then the trick to hooping that would be, I like to take a stabilizer piece that's a little bit bigger than my project, and I'm using a faff hoop today. So the first thing I do is make sure this is loose. Make sure your hoops are already open and loose. You hate to try to push it down in and it won't go, and you're trying to unfiddle with making it larger and loosening that up, and then your project moves on you. So the very next thing I do is I take the top hoop and I line it up and I pinch these three layers together. I pinch the hoop with the project and the stabilizer. And that stays as one piece as I move that around. And I find my bottom hoop, and I can move the bottom hoop with my fingers to line up, rather than trying to move the two hoops and move your project in the middle. That makes it a little more tricky. And so then I hoop the bottom part down in, and then I hoop the top part down in. And I don't know that I opened it quite enough. And then you can see it when it's hooped, your lines, your crosshairs line up, and then you're set. You know your design's going to be right in the middle of that hoop. So let's say you're going to do a design that you want to move, and it's not going to be quite centered. For example, this cute tea towel right here. You've got this design, right, that you want to do, but you want to add rickrack, let's say, to the bottom. So to make sure that you have room for your rickrack, I would lay the rickrack down and take a measuring tool ruler and measure how much space from the top of the ruler down to the bottom that you're taking, and that's 2 inches. So then I'm going to take my tea towel. I'm going to keep in mind the 2 inches. I'm going to take the tea towel and I first iron it in complete half so that I have a top line and I know where I'm going to work with the top line. That's the first thing. The next step is I'm going to use this bottom half. So now I'm going to open it up and not even think about this top half. I'm going to iron it in. I do the exact same thing I did with the tote. Now I'm going to iron it lengthwise, and this is where you would iron. And then if you were to go clear up to here and iron, that would be your center line, right? But since we are going to add that rickrack at the bottom, we don't want the center line, we want to move it up 2 inches. So after you make your center line, you can measure up 2 inches from the center line, which is right here, and generally what I do is I put a pin so I know right where that 2-inch mark is, just like that. And now I've got my pin in 2 inches above center, and now I'm going to just flip and iron that line right there, and that's my line that I'm going to follow when I'm hooping. That way, my design is centered around 2 inches up so that I can have room for my rickrack at the bottom, and it all will look centered. And again, I use the same trick. Here I have my Arborina hoop. And if your design fits in your hoop this direction, then that's the direction you'll want to hoop it. If it's going to fit better sideways, then you can hoop it in sideways. And I'm going to do sideways today because the design I'm looking at is longer. So I'm following this top piece right here. I want my top hoop. And another trick, I use 2 layers. When I'm using tea towels, I always use double your stabilizer for the tea towels because it will hold better, and you won't, because the towel is pretty thin. These tea towels can be thin. All right, and I do follow the same method. I'm going to be hooping it. I'm hooping this. This is my center point right here. So once again, I'm going to take the stabilizer, the tea towel, and the top hoop and keep it in that center. Now if you want to use your grid on these, you can use a grid too. A grid is helpful when it's an oval shape. And once again, I move the bottom piece around with my fingers and I keep the top stuck to my hoop. And that way when I go to hoop, oh, I forgot to do that, see? Make sure the hoop is big enough. And then when I go to hoop, you can get it to fit right down in the hoop. And I still don't need to do that extra stabilizer is extra good. All right, so let's do this again. So you align the center. This is my center line right here. And you can use a grid. Those grids that come with your machine actually have a really good purpose. I can find where your hoop is. All right, and then you hoop that down inside, just like that. Now, you don't always want to pull this too taut, because if you pull it too taut, then first of all, the first thing that happens if you pull it too taut is you pull it right back out of the hoop, just like that. You want to make sure that your hoop is tight enough a little bit before you pull out any wrinkles. Now if you pull too hard on one direction, it's going to distort your design, so you want to make sure you don't do that. The third hooping I wanted to show you is, let me move all this out of the way. This is by far, I think, one of the easiest ways. It's a sticky back adhesive wash away. So this is a wash away. And you would simply hoop the wash away. Loosen the hoop. This wash away, you have to loosen the hoop quite a bit because it's pretty stiff to start with it. Oh, it's wonderful. Oh, I love this stuff. I use it all the time. It's a really great stabilizer. So once you get this hoop, I tighten it, and if you have your tool, your tightening tool, you can use that as well. Each hoop has a little bit different tightening mechanism. Once you get it to this, then you can score it. You can use a pin. I like to score mine with a pair of scissors. And I like to use most of the frame. I want most of this area to be sticky. And I'll show you why in just a second. And then you just peel that off. And this is sticky. You see how that is sticky. Now the reason I'm using sticky back is I'm going to show you an apron. And it's really hard to hoop the bib part of the apron if it's off of the hoop. Let's say the edge of the hoop is right here. That's really hard to hoop. So I do the same method when I'm finding my center mark. I'm going to fold the apron in half, lining up the neck piece, and then you're going to iron this. Now I wanted my design to come and be centered near the top. I don't want it clear down on the belly of the apron. I want it near the top. So I measure down 6 inches. That's a good amount for most projects. So I'm going to measure down 6 inches, and there again I take a pin and I pin it, and then I simply fold it down at the pin and iron it again, and that gives me my center X that I want. So then when you hoop it on here, I'm going to put this on hooped. Let's see, where's the edge? I'm going to hoop it so it falls out over the edge of my embroidery arm. So when you hoop it on, all you have to do now is you line up the center line with this line with your crosshairs, and then you line up the lengthwise ones as well, and as soon as you start getting those lined up, you can press it down, and there you have hooped your apron, and now it's ready to stitch. Wasn't that slick? I like this is my, like I said, this is my most favorite method. They do have, your local store will also have tearaway if you want to use tearaway. But that is the easiest ways of hooping an apron. Can you see how this part would be, this thick bulky part of the apron would be trying to get put underneath that hoop, and that's really difficult to keep it even. So by using the sticky backwash away, you can just stick it right down. And if you want, you can, for added measure, tape around this top piece right here, but it's really not necessary. It really stays really well on this adhesive. And so those are my hooping tips. There's one more tip I'd like to share, and I don't have a shirt to show you on, but if you take a shirt, and let's pretend like this is a shirt. If you're trying to do a design on something that's like a 3D object, such as a onesie or a shirt pocket, something like that, someone taught me a trick that you take it to the edge of an ironing board. So if this is my ironing board, you slip it over the edge of the ironing board so the bottom of the shirt's underneath the ironing board, and the top of the shirt where you want to stitch is on the top of the ironing board. And then you would take, I pulled this out so I could show you, and then you would take your hoop and your stabilizer and slide it on top of the ironing board but underneath the shirt, and then you can hoop it this way, and if you were to hoop that in and get it set like that, and then you were to pull it off the ironing board, then you can take the back part of that shirt and pull it tight and roll it up, because it's going to be pulling. It's going to be kind of more like this. You're going to pull it out from underneath and you're going to roll it down, and then I generally tape it. I take a lot of tape and I tape around this so that it doesn't get underneath the needle or get caught underneath the needle. But that was a really cool trick, I thought, for hooping, because it's really hard to hoop when you have the back right there as well. You're constantly getting the back pinched in the hoop. So slide it over the edge of an ironing board and hoop just the top part, and then when you pull it off, you can roll up the back side of the t-shirt, or you can undo the side seam if you would rather, if that makes it easier for you as well. Any other suggestions that you guys have, please share. Sharing is the best way for us to help each other and enjoy embroidering. So thank you so much for joining us today at Kimber Bell, and we will see you next week on Tuesday's Tips with Laurie.